This date a long time ago. We're talking 1940. Back when Veterans Day was more commonly known as Armistice Day, which of course it still is referred to as in some cases in this day and age as well, but that's when conditions were certainly a little bit different, and that's when we saw a very strong storm system move into the region, and that provided, well, a lot of snow and more perhaps notably a lot of cold air, very unusually cold air for this time of year, and so that is what became known as the Armistice Day Blizzard. This caused a lot of disruption in so many places. Here's the area of low pressure as it was on November 11th, 1940. It was centered around just southeast of the Twin Cities after trekking across Iowa. It's this gray path here in the dotted lines that take it through the Rocky Mountains down toward the Panhandle area of Oklahoma. So we call this a Panhandle Hook storm, and that's the path that really does often provide a pretty significant winter storm when ingredients are just right. Now, the track of it kept the heaviest snow to the northwest of the TV9 viewing area, but certainly affected portions of Iowa and Minnesota. Here in the eastern half of the state, we still got the very, very strong winds that led in behind this cold front that swept through during the day on November 11th. Now, some of those winds were 40 to 50 miles per hour sustained, reports of gusts that were 60 to 70 miles per hour, and that's without thunderstorms. Remember, those are just winds that are just kind of out in the ambient open and causing a lot of problem. And that problem was very much exacerbated by the amount of snow that fell on the northwest side of the system. Now, a broad swath of Iowa saw at least a little bit of wintry precipitation, either snow. There was reports of sleet as far east of the Mississippi River, too, as temperatures dropped. 10+ inches of snow was common in central Minnesota, but even some isolated totals in northwest Iowa exceeded 10 inches. They just weren't as widespread as a little bit farther to the north. Now, here's the temperature drop for the day. This is for Cedar Rapids. Reports from the media around that time. 52 degrees observed in the morning at 8:30. That is quite warm for that time of day for this time of year. Remember, we've been seeing highs in the 50s during the afternoon, and even those are a bit on the warm side. Now, as the winds kicked in from the northwest, temperatures dropped to 11 degrees by 7 o'clock, and that fall continued a little bit later into the night. It was about 7 degrees by midnight that night, and we saw much colder temperatures hang around for a period of days. In fact, in Waterloo, the record low highs for the dates following on the 12th, the 13th, and the 14th still stand as records. So those days only got into the teens by the afternoon. And so, yeah, that really did harm further recovery efforts. Now, details about this storm. That's when many people were actually out enjoying the holiday. We had people out hunting ducks, believe it or not. They saw birds arrive before the storm arrived in the calm ahead of the storm. And so people took advantage of the holiday and went out. Now, unfortunately, weather forecasts at the time were not as great, and so they weren't ready for the big change. And so duck hunters were not dressed appropriately. They didn't take the appropriate measures once the wind started to pick up. And so unfortunately, that left them at times stranded on islands in the Mississippi River, unable to get back to shore. Some drowned when duck blinds collapsed on them. At least 4 people were killed in Iowa, many others hospitalized from exposure. Now, around the Midwest, rescue efforts, again, were hampered by continual strong winds. Those gusts stayed strong for at least another day after this. This is the Cedar Rapids Gazette headline in November 12th, so the day after the storm really made its way through the region. On the 13th, a little bit of detail about hunters that were rescued, but in addition, of course, to those 4 from Iowa that were killed. Now, unfortunately, in total, between 145 to 155 people were killed based on various reports. The number varies a little bit. Livestock also heavily affected. Unfortunately, hundreds of thousands of turkeys right ahead of Thanksgiving were killed by the storm. Transportation was heavily affected too, of course, with blizzard conditions. And again, the forecasts that were kind of the issue here. They just weren't available, as widely available at the time, and the 5-day forecasts were only issued twice per week by a regional forecast center instead of like the individual National Weather Service offices we have doing it every day, several times a day. So the Weather Bureau, which was not yet named the National Weather Service, did increase staffing to 24 hours a day after the storm because of that impact. So it did actually alter the trajectory of that. One fact that I found with this system that moved through, it heavily damaged apple trees in central Iowa. Iowa used to be a big apple producer. The Red Delicious apple was created in the state. But because of that damage and because of the things that were going on in the world at the time, the United States was not yet in World War II, but it was ongoing in Europe. There were certain restrictions and needs for the people at the time. And so a lot of those apple orchards, instead of having to wait several years for those trees to come back, they turned into regular farm fields, and so the apple industry in Iowa kind of shrunk because of this one system.
Wow, that's quite an impactful storm. You got the apples, you have those duck hunters who, I mean, if I woke up and saw temperatures in the 50s and hadn't looked at the forecast or didn't have one available, I would think it would be a good day to be out. So that, and the National Weather Service updating it to 24 hours a day, it's a big thing. Oftentimes with these snowstorms, it seems like the winds are a huge impact because of the blowing snow and because they bring in that really cold air. What a temperature drop. 50s all the way down to the single digits in 24 hours.
Yeah, and some reports, again, observations and reports weren't as widespread or as timely at the time, but some of those media reports suggested that the initial temperature drop was on the order of 20 or 30 degrees within a couple of hours. And so that what we saw over the course of the day was especially sharp immediately. So that put you below freezing in a big hurry. And with those winds, like waves on the Mississippi were several feet high. And so, yeah, if you're using a small boat, you probably couldn't make it out. And then even officials that were trying to rescue these folks had trouble. So people had to make do overnight in some cases to be able to be rescued once the winds died down.
And I doubt they brought like winter gear for single digits in a day like that.
Yeah, not at all. So sticky situation. Luckily, forecasts have improved. Our preparation for these sorts of things have improved a lot. So lessons learned, at least, were taken into consideration and applied to the future.
And that's the important part, learning from the mistakes after these big storms.